Nikola Tesla is one of the greatest scientific minds of all time.
Without Tesla's invention of alternating current technology, it would be a much darker and quieter world.
In the early 1900s, Nikola Tesla worked tirelessly at Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island.
Tesla had envisioned receiving stations which would look just like the Wardenclyffe Tower at different nodal points around the Earth. So you would jump energy by means of wireless from station to station.
Officially, it was a wireless communication project. But in truth, Tesla was attempting to transmit limitless electricity through the air and power the entire plan.
Did Nikola Tesla find the secret to unlimited energy? And is there a plot to hide his findings?
Few knew the truth. One assistant, whose name was erased from history, stood by his side the night everything changed. For decades, she kept the secret. But just before her death, she told the full story. Inside Wardenclyffe Tower. Nikola Tesla's massive structure in Shoreham, Long Island was called Wardenclyffe Tower, and it looked like a giant wooden skeleton topped with a large metal dome. To most people, it seemed like just another one of Tesla's wild experiments. But Tesla had something much bigger in mind.
Tesla would describe the process of invention as basically he would build a model in his mind and then run simulation.
He got funding for this project from a wealthy and powerful man, J.P. Morgan. Morgan was a top financier in the United States at the time and had backed many big businesses. Tesla told Morgan that the tower would be used for wireless telegraphy. This means sending messages without using wires, sort of like an early version of the radio.
He burned bridges with powerful colleagues like Thomas Edison and investors like J.P. Morgan.
At the time, this was already a cutting-edge idea. However, Tesla had no intention of stopping at just sending messages. His real plan was to build a global system that could also send power through the air or ground to any point on Earth. He kept this part of the project mostly to himself and a small group of trusted assistants. One of them would eventually reveal secrets about the tower that the government desperately tried to hide. The tower was about 187 feet tall. Underneath the tower, Tesla had workers build a maze of tunnels and chambers. These underground parts were not just for show. Tesla believed that if he could get the tower to vibrate at the same frequency as the Earth's natural electrical field, then he could send energy through the ground over long distances. He thought the Earth could act like a giant electrical conductor. In simple terms, he believed the planet itself could carry electricity the same way a wire does. This idea might sound totally strange today, but Tesla was not just making it up. He based it on real experiments and observations.
Tesla went out to Colorado Springs to see if he could send electricity miles, which is a tremendous achievement, but he had a huge tower, and there was 200 feet to the top.
The assistant, who was a young female engineer, worked closely with him throughout the Wardenclyffe project. According to her later writings and interviews, she claimed they once ran a test where light bulbs were placed miles away from the tower. When they turned the system on, the bulbs lit up without being connected to any wires. This was shocking because back then electricity needed wires. The idea of powering something from far away without a cable sounded like pure magic. But not everyone was thrilled with Tesla's plans. At first, J.P. Morgan was happy to support what he thought was a promising communication system. But when he started to realize what Tesla was really trying to do, he got nervous. If Tesla could send power to anyone anywhere in the world for free, then there would be no way to charge people for electricity. That meant no profits for investors, power companies, or the rich men who owned the electrical grids. By 1903, Tesla started receiving warnings. He was told to slow down and focus on more practical ideas. He was urged to stay within the limits of what his backers had approved. But Tesla ignored those warnings. He believed in what he was doing. He was convinced that this wireless power system could improve life for everyone, especially for people living in remote or poor areas with no access to electricity. Tesla wanted to make power free and available to all, not just to those who could afford to pay for it. The night of the experiment. One night in the spring of 1903, something extraordinary happened at Wardenclyffe Tower. It was long past midnight. The air outside was still and cool, and the nearby town slept in silence. Inside the tower, however, Nikola Tesla and his assistant were wide awake. They were alone, without any reporters or investors watching, and there were no official records made of what was about to happen. Tesla had decided that this would be the night he tested the tower at full capacity for the first time. He did not want anyone to interfere or impose restrictions. He wanted to see exactly what the system could do when it was given complete freedom to perform. According to the assistant's account, which she recorded many years later, Tesla began by checking the underground grounding system that connected the tower to the Earth. This section had always been kept secret, even from most of his team. Beneath Wardenclyffe, a network of iron pipes extended deep into the ground, connecting to the water table below. Tesla believed this allowed the tower to grip the planet electrically. When the tower's coils were activated, energy from the oscillators would surge downward through these pipes while the dome above projected a matching electrical field upward into the air. Together, the ground and the atmosphere would act like two sides of a giant natural circuit.
Transmitted wirelessly by using the Earth's natural conductivity.
The goal was to make the Earth itself carry the electrical current, allowing it to reappear anywhere else in the world where a receiver was tuned to the same frequency. The assistant later described how the experiment began. Tesla stood at the main control switch and gave her a small nod before activating the power. The low hum of the machinery started almost immediately. The copper coils inside the tower began to vibrate as the energy built up. The sound changed quickly from a soft mechanical noise to something deeper and stranger, as if the entire structure had come alive. The tower started to tremble slightly, not enough to cause damage, but enough to feel the vibration through the floor. Tesla's assistant watched as energy pulsed through the tower's core. The air filled with static. Sparks began to crawl across the metal rails and instruments. Suddenly, the top of the tower released a blinding white-blue arc of electricity that reached high into the sky. For a brief moment, it looked like lightning that refused to flicker or fade. People living miles away would later claim that they saw the sky above Wardenclyffe flash brighter than anything they had ever seen. Then, something even stranger occurred for just a few seconds. Along the shoreline several miles away, isolated buildings and small homes that had no electrical connection suddenly glowed with light. Lamps flickered to life as if someone had thrown invisible switches. Tesla remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the scene. He did not celebrate. He simply observed the results with quiet intensity. The assistant said he was whispering calculations to himself and watching the instruments carefully. It was then that the first signs of trouble appeared. Telegraph operators across Long Island began reporting signal failures. Messages stopped transmitting. Some stations lost power entirely. The assistant noticed that several of Tesla's gauges were behaving erratically. The needles jumped and spun, and the readings exceeded the highest marks on the instruments. Tesla realized that something was wrong. The massive energy feedback between the tower and the Earth had become unstable. Too much current was returning through the ground circuit faster than the system could regulate it. The resonance between the tower's coils and the Earth's electrical field was no longer in balance. The copper windings began to overheat, and smoke started to appear near the base of one of the generators. The assistant shouted something, but Tesla was already moving toward the main control lever. With one sharp motion, he cut the power and forced a complete shutdown. The humming stopped instantly. The bright arc above the dome faded until the night sky returned to black. The vibrations underfoot disappeared, and the silence that followed was so deep it made the air feel heavy. Tesla stood there for a long moment, gripping the control handle. Then he spoke softly, as if to himself, saying, "It works." The assistant said she could hear fear in his voice, not triumph. She later explained that Tesla seemed to understand that what he had just witnessed might be far more powerful than he expected. For several minutes after the shutdown, they both listened to the faint crackle of static still echoing around the dome. The assistant tried to ask questions, but Tesla did not respond. He was writing notes rapidly on a small pad, recording measurements that no one ever saw again. He told her that the results were beyond expectation and that they would have to test again soon, but only under stricter control. He warned her not to speak of the event to anyone, not even the workers who maintained the grounds. He feared that word of the success might reach the wrong ears. They thought the night was over. The air outside was calm again and the machinery had cooled. But as Tesla and his assistant began locking up the control room, she noticed something unsettling. Beyond the fence line at the edge of the trees, she could see silhouettes. Men standing still, quietly watching the tower. They did not move. They did not speak. But even in the dim light, she could see that they were not ordinary townspeople. Someone else had been there all along, witnessing what Tesla had tried so hard to keep hidden. The observers who shouldn't have been there. After the strange test at Wardenclyffe Tower ended and everything went quiet again, the assistant noticed something that made her uneasy. As she stood near the base of the tower trying to process what had just happened, she glanced toward the tree line that bordered the property.
Edison's direct current power plants dominated the nation's power needs.
It was dark, but her eyes adjusted enough to see several men standing just beyond the fence. They were grouped together, silent, and very still. What stood out immediately was their appearance. They were wearing dark uniforms, but there were no visible badges, logos, or any other symbols to show who they were or where they were from. They definitely were not local townspeople. They weren't reporters or curious neighbors. And they didn't look like any of J.P. Morgan's usual staff or business inspectors. The assistant had seen those men before. These were different. These men weren't wandering by accident. They were clearly there for a reason, and they were watching closely. They didn't say anything. They didn't move forward, but they also didn't try to hide. That silence, combined with their presence, gave her a bad feeling. Something was off. By the following morning, even though no newspapers had covered the incident and no official statements had been made, word had already spread, but only through certain private circles. According to the assistant, Tesla received a letter delivered by hand just hours after sunrise. It came from one of J.P. Morgan's personal representatives. The letter was not friendly. It didn't congratulate Tesla on his progress or ask about the results. Instead, it gave a warning. The message said that the recent test had raised serious concerns, specifically about what the letter called uncontrolled power dissemination. In simpler terms, they were worried that Tesla's system was sending out energy in ways that could not be tracked, measured, or stopped. There were also whispers about why everything collapsed so fast. Some reports from the time claimed that foreign operatives had witnessed the experiment. These weren't just rumors from conspiracy theorists. Several sources hinted that individuals from outside the United States had been tipped off about the test and had shown up to watch, quietly and from a distance. The assistant later said she believed government agents had been monitoring the site, both from the United States and from foreign countries. She was convinced that someone, or possibly several groups, had known what Tesla was planning and had decided to keep a close eye on him. At this point, Tesla's invention was no longer seen as just another scientific experiment. It had crossed a line. People in positions of power began to see it not as a clever innovation, but as a serious threat. A system that could deliver clean, wireless, unlimited energy didn't just challenge business interests. It also challenged governments, military strategies, and global control over resources. If just one man could send energy through the ground or air to any location, then existing power grids, fuel industries, and energy policies could become useless. That level of freedom and decentralization scared a lot of very powerful people. Tesla, of course, had not set out to threaten anyone. He was a scientist and inventor who wanted to improve the world. But the world he was trying to improve was not ready to give up control. This sudden scrutiny would trigger a chain of events that dismantled everything Tesla had built. The aftermath and sudden shutdown. Just a few days after that letter arrived, J.P. Morgan pulled all financial support from the project. There was no long discussion. There was no second chance. The funding simply stopped. Tesla's team, which had once been large and busy with engineers, builders, and assistants, began to shrink almost overnight. Without money, Tesla could no longer pay his staff. Some were let go. Others left on their own when they realized the project was falling apart. Supplies stopped coming in. Construction work froze. And just like that, Wardenclyffe Tower, Tesla's most ambitious project, began to fall apart. But it didn't end with just money problems. Not long after the funding disappeared, a number of officials began showing up at the site. They claimed they were there for official reasons. Some said they were doing safety inspections. Others mentioned possible violations related to patents or electrical safety codes. At first, it all sounded like standard government work, but it quickly became clear that something else was going on. According to the assistant, These visits felt more like raids than inspections. Groups of men began entering Tesla's workspaces, moving through areas that had always been off-limits to outsiders. They started going through his equipment, documents, and personal research materials. She noticed that most of these men were people she had never seen before. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't wear uniforms with clear agency names. And they never explained exactly who they worked for. But they clearly had authority, and a lot of it. Soon, large wooden crates filled with Tesla's equipment began being loaded onto trucks. These crates held sensitive instruments, custom-built tools, and components that Tesla had designed himself for wireless energy transmission. Even worse, his personal notes, lab journals, and technical drawings started disappearing. These were not just random sketches. These were the detailed plans that explained how Wardenclyffe worked, how the energy was transmitted, and what the next steps in the project were supposed to be. The assistant later said she believed many of those materials ended up in government hands. There were rumors that federal agents were involved in the removal. Some whispered that this was a secret government operation to take control of Tesla's invention, but no agency ever publicly admitted to taking anything. There were no receipts, no press statements, and no follow-up reports. It was like the whole thing had been erased from the official record. Tesla himself was never quite the same after this. The assistant described him as quiet, withdrawn, and visibly shaken. Although he kept working in private, he never again attempted anything close to what he had tried at Wardenclyffe. No more full-scale tests, no more open experiments. He stayed in small rooms, made small devices, and jotted down ideas, but the spark was gone. One day she asked him if he ever planned to restart the project. He just looked at her and said, "They realized it worked, and that's why they stopped it." That one sentence stuck with her for the rest of her life. Eventually, Wardenclyffe Tower was left to rot. It sat there for years, unused and falling apart. Eventually, the structure was taken down and sold for scrap metal.
The wounded tower, still standing in fragments, would require several more attempts to finally bring it down.
Tesla didn't fight to stop the demolition. The site that was once meant to revolutionize the world was gone, and the trail of missing records would only grow longer after Tesla's death. The missing journals. Decades after Wardenclyffe was dismantled and its equipment quietly taken away, the mystery surrounding Nikola Tesla's confiscated research only deepened. His assistant would later come forward with revelations that changed everything. By the time Tesla died in January 1943, alone in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel, the question of what had happened to his Wardenclyffe files was already decades old. His finances were exhausted, his health failing, and his last remaining possessions were the locked trunks and filing cabinets that held a lifetime of scientific notebooks. When hotel staff discovered his body, they called the authorities. Within hours, officials arrived, and not just the local police, but men representing a government office few Americans had ever heard of. That agency was the Office of Alien Property. On paper, it existed to manage assets belonging to foreign nationals during wartime. But Tesla had been a naturalized U.S. citizen since 1891, which should have excluded him entirely. Despite this, the office moved in immediately, sealing off his room and taking custody of all papers, devices, and personal effects. Witnesses said trunks were rolled out of the hotel under armed guard. Within a day, everything Tesla owned, thousands of pages of notes, technical sketches, correspondence, and unfinished inventions was gone. The seized collection was vast. Some documents described his well-known work with alternating current, oscillators, and radio signals. Others referenced obscure projects he had mentioned only to a handful of assistants. Among these were blueprints and theoretical notes about a system he called Teleforce, later sensationalized by newspapers as a death ray.
Serbian-American Nikola Tesla announces his invention of a revolutionary particle beam weapon, the death ray.
Tesla claimed it could focus streams of charged particles through the air to form a beam capable of destroying aircraft hundreds of miles away. He insisted it was not a weapon of conquest, but a defense technology that could make war impossible. He had tried to interest multiple governments, including the United States and the United Kingdom, yet none invested. After his death, every document referring to Teleforce was tagged as sensitive, and most have never been released in full. Equally intriguing were the papers connected to his resonant energy transmission experiments. These are the same principles that powered the original design of the Wardenclyffe Tower. When the Office of Alien Property finished cataloging Tesla's belongings after his death, they created a formal government inventory listing every trunk, folder, and technical document collected from his hotel room. But when this list was later reviewed by FBI analysts and military engineers, something didn't add up. Entire sections of Tesla's research were missing, specifically the files that described how he planned to send electrical power wirelessly through the Earth and atmosphere. These included detailed circuit diagrams, field strength measurements, and notes on atmospheric conductivity that would have explained the inner workings of Wardenclyffe.
When he built this Wardenclyffe Tower, it tapped into the energy from the Earth and the energy in the atmosphere.
Instead of being recorded as destroyed or lost, those entries were marked in the official notes as missing and, in later revisions, relocated. That word relocated was never defined anywhere in the file system, leaving it unclear whether the materials had been sent to another federal agency, a military research division, or a classified archive. The government never explained the transfer, and no receipts or chain of custody forms were released. To researchers who later examined the declassified paperwork, this wording suggested a quiet reclassification rather than an accident. Why remove and refile those specific documents if they contained nothing significant? The trail briefly resurfaced 4 decades later. In the 1980s, a batch of declassified FBI files became public through the Freedom of Information Act. Buried among hundreds of pages were inventory sheets, referencing certain Wardenclyffe-related documents, annotated again with the word relocated. Another memo confirmed that a physicist from the National Defense Research Committee had reviewed Tesla's work shortly after his death and noted its potential value to national defense. None of the original notebooks were attached. To this day, no one knows where those particular materials ended up, whether in a military archive, a classified energy program, or destroyed under sealed orders. Years after Wardenclyffe Tower fell silent and the world moved on, a determined few set out to find the people who had worked there. These technicians once stood at the heart of Tesla's bold experiment, but when asked to talk, almost all of them shut down completely. Their refusal wasn't casual or polite, it felt deliberate, like they were protecting something or someone. This silence only deepened the mystery surrounding Tesla's forgotten project. One journalist came closer than most to breaking the story wide open. He had spent months preparing an article focused on Tesla's claims of transmitting energy over long distances without wires.
And therefore he could create a distribution system for electricity that didn't require poles and wires.
But then, just before the article was about to be published, he abruptly withdrew it. When pressed for reasons, he mentioned vague pressures, never revealing who or what was behind them. This sudden silence hinted at unseen forces working hard to keep Tesla's work hidden from the world. It wasn't until just before her death in 1957 that Tesla's assistant finally recorded the full story. The resonance that never stopped. Years after Tesla's death, his assistant's old reel-to-reel recording resurfaced in a private estate sale. The tape was badly degraded, but researchers at a small laboratory in New York managed to restore most of it. Her trembling voice described what she had seen that night in 1903, how the sky erupted above the tower, how the ground seemed to vibrate like a living thing, and how the air itself felt charged with something that was not meant to be there. For a long time, her testimony was treated as folklore. Then, decades later, new data forced scientists to look again. In the early 2000s, a historian of electrical engineering named Dr. Andrew Knecht discovered a series of archived telegraph logs from Long Island and the eastern seaboard. The entries from the same night as Tesla's experiment contained multiple reports of electromagnetic disturbance of unknown origin. Operators wrote that their signals had been jammed by continuous interference, not storm static, and that compasses and galvanometers behaved as if the ground itself were electrified. Knecht also found that several magnetic observatories across the Atlantic recorded an unexplained pulse within that same hour. The pattern was identical to the frequency Tesla once claimed would resonate with the Earth's natural electrical field.
He believed that you'd be able to pump electrical energy into the Earth at the resonant frequency of the Earth, set up standing waves.
When modern physicists mapped those readings, the results were unnerving. The disturbances formed a wave pattern centered almost exactly on Shoreham, New York, the location of Wardenclyffe Tower. the pulse had lasted more than 40 minutes before fading. No thunderstorms or solar activity occurred that night. To this day, it remains listed as an anomalous terrestrial resonance event. Even more puzzling was a reference discovered years later in a declassified research file from the National Defense Research Committee, dated in the 1940s. The memo referred to a persistent geophysical signal consistent with Tesla's predicted resonance. Although the language was cautious, it strongly implied that Tesla's 1903 experiment might have left a measurable electromagnetic effect in the layers of the Earth's crust. Several scientists who later examined the file suggested that the Wardenclyffe discharge could have temporarily energized a natural electrical pathway that already existed within the planet. According to this interpretation, the pulse did not vanish immediately after the tower shut down. Instead, it slowly weakened over time but never completely disappeared. If this interpretation is accurate, then Tesla may have briefly converted the Earth into a large-scale electrical transmitter without fully understanding how extensive the effect had become. His assistant's frightened observations therefore appear less like exaggerations and more like the honest account of someone who witnessed a powerful environmental reaction. No one has ever been able to confirm whether the resonance stopped completely. Modern researchers who have tested the ground around the former Wardenclyffe site have reported faint and irregular electrical fluctuations that occur at nearly the same frequency Tesla documented in his surviving notes. The measurements are small and close to the limits of detection, yet they remain consistent over time. Some scientists believe these readings are caused by background noise or minor interference from nearby power lines. Others believe the signals are genuine remnants of Tesla's original transmission. The question remains open, but the data suggests that something unusual still lingers beneath the soil at Shoreham, quietly repeating the same electrical rhythm that began on that night in 1903. What do you believe really happened inside Wardenclyffe Tower that night?